We want to thank everybody for taking their morning. My name is Jason Sleet. I'm the Communications Director for Revenue. I'm the one who invited you all, and I think my name shows up in a lot of the invites because I set up the Zoom meeting. And I have talked to some of you through email already. So welcome everybody. Thank you for taking the time out and hanging out with us. Jen, why don't you introduce yourself and get this show on the road?
Thanks, Jason. As he said, my name is Jennifer Hicks. I am a tax examiner within the Withholding Unit. Some of you may recognize me if you travel to ABC clinics during the year. I do present there as well. And today we're gonna talk about the 2024 form, the new form MW4 and the withholding tax tables. Just a couple housekeeping things that I wanted to put out there. If we will stop periodically throughout the presentation to answer some questions along the way. But if we don't, with the amount of people attending today, if we don't get to all of your questions, we will respond via email within the 24 hours. We may even do a recap to everybody here just as an FYI on some of the questions so that everybody has the same information. And I also wanted to just remind everybody of some changes for us for tax year 2024. Our W-2 penalties increase in tax year 2024. They go from $5 per W-2 with a minimum of $50 to $50 a W-2 with a minimum of $250. Which means that the first 5 would automatically be a $250 penalty, and then anything above that, it's an extra $50 per W-2. Again, that will start for tax year 2024. The other reminder is we do have a de minimis going into tax year 2024. Currently, the state of Montana does not have a de minimis, so what that means is it doesn't matter if you're in our state working for a day, an hour, a week, 10 weeks, whatever, you're required to report any wages and withholding earned in our state. What was passed in legislation is there's a 30-day de minimis. So this means that as a payroll provider, you would need to track when your employees are working in our state. And once you reach that 30-day mark, you would need to report any wages and withholding earned in our state. If you have questions on either of those, feel free to give us a call and we can talk you through any of that. And with that, I will get started on the MW4 so that we can hopefully address all your questions. And for this, here, share my screen. Okay, so, excuse me. Are you seeing my screen, Jason? I just had a weird thing come up.
Yeah, I saw it for just a moment, and then it went back.
Okay, let me fix that. Okay. It's there now, right?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Let me hide that. Okay, so reasons why you would want to file a new form MW4 for tax year 2024. I just want to note that we do not have it in statute that you are forced to file a new MW4. However, we do highly encourage you to do so. The reason behind that is some reasons here listed. It's due to income tax simplification. We no longer have allowances, so we will defer back. Our tax tables are based on your federal filing status. And so it's important for that reason alone to complete your form. Our tax rate did lower from 6.75 to 5.9. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, it's going to be based on your filing status versus your allowances. Another reason might be a change in your job or your financial situation. You could get a new job. You might have multiple jobs, which we will go over the multiple jobs worksheet today. Maybe you got married, maybe you got divorced, maybe you have children. And then you may have like a large raise or bonus or something like that. So those are all good reasons as well. Our exemptions did not change. We still have the same 4 exemptions as noted here. So you would want to complete the form for an exemption. Our TAP has been updated, so you'll see a new version of the MW4 on tap when you go to file beginning in January. And so where it will only show that exemption piece versus the allowance piece and the exemption piece. I do want to note, we do stress the importance of a physical address being listed on your MW4s. And that is just to help us verify your locations. We do understand in some situations where reservations do not have a physical address, they just run everything through a PO box. So in those scenarios, we will probably be reaching out to you and requesting a copy of either an ETM form or a tribal, tribal card that does note that they are a member of that tribe, just as a verification. Here's what the new MW4 looks like. We'll go through this line by line here in a minute, but I just wanted you guys to be able to see an example before we get moving through the next couple of screens. As you've noticed, the allowance piece is gone, and we're now referencing your filing status. The first section of the form, pretty self-explanatory. The employee's name, social security number, physical address. Again, we understand in certain situations you don't have a physical address, so we'll be requesting additional information on those. And then, of course, city, state, and zip there. So question 1 on your new MW4, this is going to be the question that you answer based on your federal filing status. Keep in mind that due to Senate Bill 399, we no longer look at your allowances, we look at your federal filing status, so it's important that you match what's with the feds. We also no longer will have the same form, meaning you're married filing separately on the same form. That form will no longer be available. Itemization goes away unless you itemize with the state. So it's really important that you review these and fill these out and have your employees fill these forms out. First, the question 1, they're all pretty self-explanatory. Single, married filing separately. If you do have multiple jobs, you'll complete the worksheet, which we'll go over here in a minute. Married filing jointly, qualifying widower, or head of household. Question 2, married filing jointly with both spouses working. You'll notice in the description down below, if you're married and your spouse are both working and earn similar incomes, you would mark that box. If you and your spouse have multiple jobs or you have a significant difference between your income, you would want to mark 1B. We do give you $10,000 as a reference as far as the significant difference, but that's really up to you to determine if you want to fill out the multiple jobs worksheet based on the income that you and your spouse have. Is there any questions so far?
Yes, we've had a couple of questions.
Okay.
The first question has to do with allowances. Since we're getting rid of the allowances, does that mean we're getting rid of the exemptions for dependents and itemization, itemized deductions, that sort of thing? And I did type an answer out in the chat and just said, yeah, those refer to our personal dependent exemptions as well as our itemized deductions. However, I don't think we've gotten to it yet, but Jen's going to show us the line that folks can use if they do have large federal itemized deductions or federal adjustments, as well as large Montana subtractions or large Montana tax credits, the line they can use to take into account for the loss of those allowances. Right, Jen?
Yep.
Yeah. And then we did have one other question sitting out here. As a payroll clerk, will there be any reason to mail a copy of the MW4 to the state after these changes?
Currently, no. The rule of thumb is if you have an exemption, you would want to complete the MW4 electronically. We don't do any paper MW4s. The only time we generally would request a paper MW4 is if we're doing an audit on a business. We may request those at that time. So if you didn't have them on file, you would need to fill them out with your employees at that time when we request them. I can't give you an exact date of when that would be. It just would be if your company was selected for an audit. But we do highly recommend that you do have these filled out by all your employees and just saved at your local businesses.
Great. All right. So another person here, if they can't itemize on the federal return, cannot itemize on the state any longer. So with the change beginning with tax year 2024, we're no longer going to have Montana specific itemized deductions. We're going to basically be starting our income, Montana's taxable income. The base for determining that will be after your federal, after you report your federal AGI and your federal standard or itemized deduction. And that's where we'll start at that point in determining your Montana taxable income. So basically, if you're itemizing on the federal return, you're getting that benefit when you file your Montana tax return, but we will no longer have any specific state itemized deductions. Will there be any FAQs on the agency website for employers? We do have the employer and information agent guide out available on our website, and I can post that link out in the chat. And somebody asked, what's the importance of the physical address versus the PO box?
We use that for verification. So with like your North Dakota reciprocity that we have, so one of the exemptions is that you're I'll go back here. Let me make sure I say this right. That you are a Montana resident working, or excuse me, yes, a Montana resident who works in North Dakota and vice versa. We have a reciprocity agreement with them. So we would have to verify that information. And so we would need your physical address. Your PO box really doesn't tell us a whole lot because you can have a PO box anywhere. And so it's important for us to know your physical location. Same thing applies for the tribal exemption, because in order to qualify for that, you have to be living and working on the reservation of the tribe that you are a member of. So if you're a member of a tribe, a different reservation in a tribe, and you come and work on somebody else's, you technically have to withhold on those wages. And so we need to verify that you actually live and work on that reservation that you are a member of. And so that's the importance of that physical address.
So what do you mean by submitting an MW4 electronically for an exempt worker? Is that through TAP?
Yes, ma'am. So you would fill those out via TAP. You do have to have a account on TAP to be able to do that. It is now a logged in process. So you would have to have a TAP account. And then in TAP, you can just select file MW4, and then you just fill it out and submit those to us. And then we turn those around within 24 hours.
Great. And then how do we withhold on someone if there is not a W-4 or if it's not indicated on the W-4?
So that's a business decision. We can't really tell you what you have to do. We do recommend if you don't get any back, you just withhold at the higher rate, which would be single, just to make sure everything's, that you do withhold enough. But like I said, it's a business decision. We can't tell you what you need to do. I apologize.
Yeah, and then kind of another question similar to that. It's going to be difficult to determine when someone is, if they are withholding enough. So is there going to be a tool similar to what the IRS has, that tax withholding estimator, where someone can go and estimate whether or not they are withholding enough tax?
We are currently working on a tax calculator similar to the IRS to help you with those types of situations. Again, it's just it's an estimate. It's not an actual, because we don't know everybody's tax situation, but hopefully it will help guide people through this. Yes.
All right. For existing employees, are they required to fill out a new MW4, or can they choose to keep their current?
Like I mentioned earlier, we can't force anybody to complete the new MW4. However, we highly recommend it due to the lowering of our tax tables and our tax rate. The consensus is if you don't do anything, you're going to probably over withhold, and so you would have more money in your pocket when you file your taxes. However, the reason behind this is to give you more money in your pocket paycheck to paycheck. I have some examples I'll show you here in a minute that kind of breaks that down for you and shows how that works, to where, you know, if you'd rather have that refund when you file your taxes, that's probably what's going to happen if you don't do anything. But if you want more money in your pocket from paycheck to paycheck, you're going to want to fill out the form.
Okay. Let's see. Then we've got a question about, so the current MW4 doesn't have marital statuses. So how do we withhold for current workers who don't submit a new MW4 for 2024 and are still using the old form?
So that's kind of with that other question. So basically right now we're still in tax year 23. So you want to use all the same information we currently have for 2023. This change does not go into effect until January 1 of 2024. And so again, if nobody completes the form, it's really up to you as a business to decide what you want to do in that situation. I would recommend single, just because that's our highest tax bracket. But really that's a business decision on your part as to where do you want to put those employees who choose not to fill out the form.
Yeah, and so one thing to mention too, in our Form MW4 instructions, we do instruct the employer, you know, if the form is invalid, meaning they haven't filled anything out, they haven't sent it back to you, withhold as if they are a single filer and as if they check that line 1 single box.
Okay.
All right, let's see. What's the new deadline for filing the new MW4?
There's really not a deadline. It's up to you as to when you get them completed. I would encourage to do it as soon as possible, but I understand a lot of you have a lot of employees and it does take time. So until they do complete it, like we mentioned, I would defer to single until you get them in your system.
All right. Well, I'm going to hand it back over to you, Jen.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so question 3 pertains to extra withholding. There's several reasons why you may want to put a dollar amount in this column. One of those is going to tie into the multiple job worksheet, which we'll go over here in a minute. But maybe let's just say you like to have a little bit of a buffer, so you just like to withhold an extra $25. So you would put that number in line 3. And then they would withhold based on your filing status and an extra $25 per pay period. Another reason could be for 1099-R withholding. We do understand some companies don't like to withhold to each state. So if you wanted to determine what your withholding should be based on your 1099-Rs, you could review that using our tables, and then you would input that dollar amount on line 3. Your unemployment payments. Please keep in mind, unemployment currently is not taxable, but it will become taxable in tax year 2024. So they may want to review what their unemployment payments are and then, you know, defer to our tables to determine some extra withholding there. Again, keep in mind, this is additional withholding. So this is withholding after your filing status, and then this extra like $25 or whatever ends up on line 3. So this is going to be an additional withholding amount. Are there any questions on that?
It seems like we're keeping it pretty well.
Okay, perfect. I'll keep going. So question number 4 is going to be a reduced withholding. This gives you an option to select a direct amount of withholding you want withheld. So let's say you know your tax situation down to the penny, and so you know that your withholding really only needs to be $100 every pay period. If you put $100 on line 4, that is all your employer is going to withhold. They're not going to withhold anything based on your filing status. They are only going to withhold $100 per pay period. So on this line, we're actually we're requesting you just for this first year at least till we kind of get in the habit to maybe if somebody puts 0 in line 4, maybe question that a little bit more. Just because if they put a 0 in line 4, that means that there's absolutely no withholding. And the last thing that we want is for somebody to put a 0 in there on accident, and then at the end of the year they have a bigger tax liability because they misunderstood the question. So if it doesn't apply to you, we're asking that you please leave it blank. Another situation on this one might be that you really truly don't need withholding because maybe you have, you take part of some large credits. And so when it's all said and done, you actually don't owe anything and you just end up, with all your withholding being refunded to you. So there are going to be situations where people will put a 0 in line 4 and they truly intended to do so. So, but we just really want to be cautious on this line because again, we don't want to not withhold on somebody that really actually needs withholding. So just be really cautious of that. And do keep in mind as well, I just want to throw this out there, withholding is not a choice. Withholding is law. It's a state law that you are required to withhold on wages earned in our state. Excuse me. Estimated payments is not in lieu of withholding. And so if we could potentially be running reports on this in the future, if we do see a lot of zeros on this on this line. So I just want you to be aware that you truly do not need to withhold. Is there any questions on that one? We generally get a lot of questions on this line.
Right now we've got a couple questions out here about withholding on unemployment and mainly asking if the state will be withholding on unemployment. And the MW4 now is designed to, a taxpayer could bring it into the unemployment office. And when they sign up for unemployment, give the MW4 to the person there and say, on line 3, here's how much I want you to withhold from my unemployment check every payment, right?
Well, I'm not aware of that. So if that's the case, that's new information.
Right, yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, so the MW4 could be used to request withholding on your unemployment, just like it's used to request withholding on your retirement wages, other 1099s.
Okay.
We did have one question. Will an employee need to fill out both the federal W4 and an MW4, or can we consolidate and just use the federal form?
I would recommend that you fill out both, just because of the different tax rates, but I haven't been asked that question. So I'll defer maybe to my manager. Donna, do you have a preference on that?
Yes, I think we would require the Form MW4 for employees in lieu of the federal W4, especially for the additional withholding.
Okay, I was thinking along that lines too. Thank you.
All right, and then just a question on working with payroll software companies. We are working with payroll software companies, and I believe Jen and Donna, you guys are both in contact regularly with the big guys out there, right?
Yep. We do work closely with them through our e-services. And like I mentioned earlier, the vendors do go through a testing process. This information was put out on their SCS website for them to upload into their software. We just don't know the time frame of for them personally on how when they'll get that done, because we just don't know their work schedules and what their developers are working on and whatnot. So if you have questions on when this will be uploaded in their software, you may want to reach out to them directly.
Okay, we have a few questions here about line 4.
Okay.
So do you want to talk a little more about what folks will enter in on line 4 or not enter in when determining what their reduced withholding amount will be?
So line 4 again is an exact amount of withholding. So if you put a dollar amount in line 4, that is all that's going to be withheld. They're not going to look at your filing status or anything outside of that. They are just going to withhold what you input on that line. So in some scenarios, you have individuals who know their filing status, or excuse me, their tax situation down to the penny. So they know that every year they need to withhold at least this much money every year. So they could put a specific dollar amount in there. We don't recommend that, but there could be some people who are just that savvy with their taxes. Another situation could be, let's say you're anticipating a lot of subtractions or credits from the state when you file. And so every year you get all your withholding back. So maybe you want that money in your pocket, paycheck to paycheck, instead of waiting until you file at the end of the year. And so you'll put a 0 in there and there won't be any withholding whatsoever. We just want people to keep in mind, if you put a 0 there, there's absolutely no withholding. We don't want somebody to be filling out the form and think, oh, I need to put a 0 here, so they think I don't want it. You know what I'm saying? And then we don't withhold and they actually want withholding. So we just need to be cautious that people understand that whatever dollar amount they put there is the only amount of withholding per pay period that's going to be withheld. Hopefully that helped.
Yeah, yeah. And so, yeah, and another way to think about it is if it's blank, then we're going to default to whatever you put on line 1 or line 2, right?
Correct. Yep. Yep.
And if it's 0, then it's going to be 0.
Correct.
And then that's a per pay period figure. So that's per pay period. It's not for the entire year. We had an interesting question in here about tax an employee repeatedly. While the taxpayer repeatedly does not withhold Montana tax resulting in a tax due year after year, will the employer be contacted to withhold at the highest withholding rate? And then also another question about tips. Tips will be taxed in 2024. They're no longer exempt under the new law. But Jen, do you want to talk a little bit about repeatedly not withholding year after year and having a tax due? Or maybe Donna?
I just have one quick question just to kind of understand that. So the employee is choosing not to have withholding withheld from year to year, I'm assuming, or from.
Yeah, I believe the employee, I believe it's the employee does not withhold Montana tax and has a tax due every year as a result of not having withholding from their wages. Are we going to contact the employer about that?
Yes, the employer will get a letter from us if they are filing wages no withholding and they are not, excuse me, and their filing status is not required. So account holders who are considered not required are not required to withhold. And so those individuals won't hear from us. It's going to be those individuals who are monthly, annual, accelerated, and so on. And you have employees who are not withholding. We run a report every year and send out a letter that says your employees, you have no withholding. We're going to assess penalties based on the fact that that you should be withholding, but you have time to respond to those letters before that penalty is assessed. And we do that to try to help educate both the employee and the employer on the importance of that withholding. If you do have an employee who just absolutely refuses, that's just something you'd have to, as the employer, maybe reach out to us and let us know that. But yeah, we really got to focus on the fact that estimated payments is not in lieu of withholding. You're required by law to withhold. And maybe that's a way to address that for that employer with that employee, is just to state, this is a state law, you need to be withholding, and maybe have that conversation.
And may I add to that is if an employer does receive the wages no withholding letter and penalties will be assessed, if you provide the MW4 that the employee completed that had 0 on line 4, we will accept that and not assess the penalties to the employer.
All right. So if both fields, extra withholding and reduced withholding, have amount, which one should we withhold, or should we withhold both? If yes, which takes priority?
Our opinion on that is if you do have an employee who completes both lines, I would probably talk to them about that and explain that difference, and have them recomplete it, because there's really because one line is telling you to withhold more, and the other line is telling you just to withhold a certain dollar amount. So it's really a conversation you would have to have with your taxpayer, or excuse me, your employee, because yeah, you would have to decide which one they actually truly meant, I think, in that scenario.
Okay. We've got a few questions in here about ag and agricultural employees, and they are still exempt from withholding taxes, right?
Correct. Yep. So they would fall under that not required category I mentioned a minute ago.
Yeah. Okay. I'm trying to catch up here. Lots of great questions coming in.
I think I will go on to the next couple of things. I just don't want to run out of time, and then we'll
Yeah,
stop
you
again
bet.
here in a minute, if that's okay.
Yeah, you bet.
Okay. Okay, so here's a view of the multiple jobs worksheet. In the next couple of screens, we're gonna go over some examples on how to complete this worksheet. Please keep in mind, in my examples, this is just solely based on wages. We're not taking into consideration anything outside of just your wages. So these are just really simple examples to kind of show you how this worksheet works. But we do understand there are outlying tax situations that are going to be slightly more complicated. And so for those situations, we're just asking that you reach out to my unit manager, Donna, or myself, and we can go through those with you over the phone, or even in another Zoom or Teams meeting or something, because we do understand everybody's tax situation is different. So the examples I'm showing are just very short and sweet, just have to do with wages and nothing else. So in my first example, your first employer, and these multiple jobs worksheets are actually a part of the withholding, or excuse me, the MW4 instructions. They're in the back of the instructions if you have a copy of the MW4. So the first example, we are doing a single taxpayer who has two jobs. Their first job is $70,000 in income, and their second job is $20,000. So if you were to look over to the table on the right, you would go to the higher paying job, which is $70,000, go across that line, and then the column with the $20,000, and where they intersect is that one highlighted in orange, which is 1,046. So if you go back to the jobs worksheet, this is what you would put in line 1. This would be your 1,046. So then if you go back to the table, it says that you need to divide it by number of pay period. So in this scenario, we did every other week. So you would divide that by 26. So then the division is like $40.23. So you would want to round up to the nearest dollar per our instructions. And so that would be 41. So that $41 would go on line 3 of the form MW4. So that's going to be the extra withholding above your filing status that they're going to withhold per pay period. We do ask that you do this on the highest paying job. However, that's totally up to you. If you and your spouse decide you want to do it on the lower paying job, that's fine. We just recommend the higher paying job, but that is a decision that you and your spouse would make. Or excuse me, this isn't the spouse one. You would make as an individual. So then on this table, we're breaking it down for you and showing you what the wages would be, or excuse me, the tax would be, and what the withholding would be. So if you took from the $70,000 and divided by the 26, that's roughly $2,693 in tax. Then on the second job, if you took the $20,000 and divided that by 26, that's roughly $770. So the total of the two is the $3,463. So if you look at the table above, the first of that $3,463, the first $562 is not taxed. So then the difference between $562 and $1,350 is that $788. So then you multiply that by the tax rate of 4.7, so $37 of that is taxed. So then if you go to the next line, so the remaining of the 1350 minus the 2690, or excuse me, 3463 is 2013. So of that, 125 is the tax. So the total tax biweekly is $162. So now if you go to your tax tables to figure out what you're withholding on those two jobs, the first table, excuse me, the first job that has the 2,693 would be your bottom row on the table off to your right. And you're looking in your single column, which is your first column, is $117 per pay period. And then for the $770, if you were to take that one, which is going to be in your first row, that's only $12 a pay period. So the total is $129. So essentially at this point, your biweekly tax is $162, but you're only withholding $129 between each pay period between your two jobs. So that's where your worksheet comes in, your multiple jobs worksheet, and you're withholding an additional $41 per the formula. So in the end, you're actually withholding $170 per pay period. So you're actually withholding an extra $8 to cover that multiple job. So is there any questions on that? I explain that.
We have a couple of questions out here related to penalties and interest with zero entry on line 4. And I think we'll probably just try and answer those here in the chat box.
Okay.
And folks can see the answers to the chat questions in the Q&A box. So if you are interested in those, do that there. But as far as, sorry, let me. Yeah, so we're getting a lot of questions on the reduced withholding. How about you just keep going through your examples, and then I'll try and get these compiled for you at your next break. How's that?
Perfect, thanks. So the next example that we provided is a married couple or a spouse situation. Spouse A makes $100,000, spouse B makes $60,000. So if you go over to the table on the right, the $100,000 is the bottom column, the $60,000 is the column at the end there where they intersect. It's 2,212. And in this situation, our pay periods are weekly, and so we divided that by 52. When you round it up, it ends up $43 a pay period. So then if we go into the example, the first job is $100,000. So the weekly tax there is $1,924. So the $60,000, when you divide that by 52, the tax there is $1,154. So together, that's the $3,078. So then again, if you go up to the table above, the first $562 is not taxed. The next $788 is $37. And the remaining $1,728 is $102. So your total weekly tax is $139. So then now if you were to figure out your withholding calculation using the table off to the right, your weekly withholding for the 1924 is going to be 76. And then the withholding for the 1,154 is going to be $31. So in the end, your tax is $139, but you're only withholding $107. But then by completing the worksheet, you're adding an additional $43. And so you actually end up withholding $150 per pay period to cover that $139 per pay period in tax. So that was my, and again, this is your situation between you and your spouse. If you decide, we do recommend the higher paying job does the multiple jobs worksheet on their MW4. However, if you choose to do it on the lower paying job, that's up to you. You have to do it one way or the other. Just keep in mind, only one of you has to fill this out. You both wouldn't do the calculation. It would just be one of you. And then the other one would just withhold based on your filing status. So then the next thing that is on that form is going to be your exemptions. Again, there hasn't been a change in our exemptions. They're still the same that they have been in the past. They do have to be submitted on an annual basis. We do have some people who ask, well, I did this last year, why do I got to do it again? It is an annual approval. And that is written in our code. Again, we are preferring a physical address, but if you end up putting a PO box, we'll reach out to you and just do some verification with you. We didn't have the chance this year, but next year we're going to hopefully get an attachment function added to the MW4 request on tap to where you can just upload that information right away. Another thing to keep in mind is we're no longer going to send a denial letter to the employee and the employer. It is just going to go straight to the employer. And then again, the exemption requests have to be submitted via TAP. And then for the bottom of the form, the last part of the form is just where the employee signs it, and then the employer completes their information. Again, we're asking you to complete this, but we're not, there's no law that says you have to, but we do encourage it just to help your employees with their withholding. And again, if you have any questions, because you have a really in-depth situation, maybe you have an employer or employee who has multiple jobs, more than 2 or whatever, please feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to walk through those with you one at a time, just to make it a little bit easier. And that's the end of the slides. So if you want to go back to questions.
All right. Yeah, sure thing. So we had a series of questions here that I will just read out to you. So one person is asking, isn't it a breach of the taxpayer's private information to reach out to the employer? I'm assuming this is in regards to not having enough income tax withheld. And Jen or Donna, do you want to take that question?
Jen, do you mind if I take that question?
Nope, you go right ahead.
For a clarification, is in regards to when an employer receives wages no withholding letters and where we assess penalties, that is sent when all W-2s have no withholding. So if you have 20 employees and you withhold on one of those employees and no withholding on the other employees, you will not receive the letter. The only time would be is if every single employee that you have no withholding is withheld or remitted, the letter is sent. And so if all your employees have 0 on line 4, we just need a copy of their MW4 submitted to us, and then we do not assess the penalties. I hope that clarifies in regards to the wages no withholding.
Okay. And then I think I've got a duplicate question here. So if the employer's off the hook for the penalties associated with a 0 on line 4, will the employee then receive the notice penalty for requirement to withhold? Edit. More specifically, ask corporations with officers on payroll. Will the officer be subject to a penalty?
I'll answer that, but Jennifer,
thanks.
I'm sorry, Jennifer or Rachel, you may want to piggyback. But if we have a W-2 without withholding and that letter's not sent, then when they file their tax return, if they're over a certain amount for tax due, penalties and interest would be assessed. And they would not receive a letter from the withholding unit in regards to wages no withholding unless they all employees had no withholding. And I don't know if you want to clarify any of that, Rachel, or if you have any additional perspective on that.
I think really with this whole change to our MW4 and not having allowances any longer, it really does push the burden down to the employee, right? So a lot of these penalties and interests are going to be penalties and interests for not paying enough taxes. And of course, the way that we do that for wage workers is through our withholding each month. So I think a lot of these folks will see big big penalties and interest on their own individual income tax return. How that's going to flow over to the employer is not, those are two separate things, I guess. Some more questions here. Will an employer who employs their kids under 18 for a Schedule C get a letter because they are not withholding but still reporting wages?
Yes, I do believe so. Believe that they will. We, correct me if I'm wrong, Donna, but we defer to the IRS in those situations, and they do state that you have to withhold on those wages.
I'll just piggyback. If you submit a W-2 for wages, you are required to withhold. So if you give your any employee under the age of 18, child or otherwise, and you submit a W-2, you are required to withhold, as long as they fall within the withholding based on their filing status.
Okay. Does the employee need to check box 1B or 2, but not both? So either 1B or 2, but not both.
Yeah, so that would depend on, I'll go back to that here really quick. That will depend on whether or not you fill out the multiple jobs worksheet. Because if you look at the question for number 2, it says if you're married and you and your spouse are both working and earn similar incomes, you would mark this box. So if your income ratio between you and your spouse is roughly around like 10,000 or less, you would mark this box. You would mark box 2. If you're going to fill out the multiple jobs worksheet, that's where you would want to go in and mark box 1B and then complete the worksheet. So yes, you would only mark one or the other.
Okay. If you are processing payroll for employers and their employees are not providing the completed MW4, but it does not appear to be completed correctly, do we process completed or should we contact the employee?
So if I'm understanding right, the question is that they are not completing the form correctly, so you need to know how to determine their withholding. Is that right?
I think that's right.
Okay. So basically in that situation, as we mentioned before, I would withhold at that single rate until you can get that clarification from them.
Okay. So maybe contact the employee.
Yeah, reach.
If you don't hear back, just withhold on them as if they were single.
Correct.
Okay. Will we as a payroll agent for employers have to submit MW4 through TAP annually or only if an audit were to happen?
So again, the only ones that need to be submitted through TAP is if you're requesting one of our 4 exemptions. Otherwise, we just ask that you keep a file of your MW4 so that if you are selected for an audit and we request those, you have them on file. If you don't choose to do that, then again, you would just have to complete them at the time that we request them.
Okay. Is there a list of automatic exempt situations since this is not listed on the W4? And this is regarding agricultural employees. So no, the automatic exempt, there are very few automatic exempt from wage withholding. We do have them in our employer and information agent guide. Agriculture is one of the exempt statuses that you do not have to file an MW4 for. Also, railroad workers are another one off the top of my head. Military, active duty military are another one that is automatic exempt. But if you want to see the full list, you can go and take a look at our information agent or an employer and information agent guide. Ugh, it's a mouthful.
It is.
Rachel, may I clarify something?
Sure.
If you have an ag employee, you're still required to file the MW3, not the MW4, and you still are required to send W-2s to the state of Montana.
Right. And if they do want, they can still have tax withheld from their wages too, if they want, right?
Correct. And if they do choose to have withholding, they are considered an annual filer. And so that withholding is due to the state of Montana by the 31st of January when they file their returns.
Okay. And for clarification, I understand you recommend an MW4 for changes in specific amounts, but Are you saying it is a state law that all employees are required to submit an MW4 annually, even if there is no change from last year's status?
No, that's the thing I mentioned, I think at the beginning. There is no statute that says that you are required to file the MW4 per law. We are just strongly encouraging it due to the change that we're making and that the allowances are no longer there, and that we are withholding based on your federal filing status.
Okay. All right. You said if spouses file married joint where both spouses work, only one spouse has to fill out the MW4, or do both spouses file it? And if income is similar, both spouses just mark box 2. If incomes are significantly different, only one spouse has to do the multiple job calculation. So I think maybe just a little clarification on how that the married joint with two spouses working. Can you go over that again, Jen?
Yep. So she's correct, or he is correct in what they stated. So the way that works is if you're married filing jointly and you and your spouse, your incomes are maybe within, $10,000 of each other, you would both complete the MW4 just marking box 2. However, if there is a significant difference, like in my example, where there was about a $40,000 difference in income, the higher paying spouse would want to complete the form and do the multiple job worksheet and then mark 1B versus 2. Again, we encourage you to do it on the higher paying job, but if your situation, you choose to do it on your spouse's job, where that's the lower paying job, you can do that as well. But only if you're going to complete a multiple job worksheet, only one spouse has to do that. And then the other spouse would just complete it, and it would be marking the box 1B, and then they would withhold on that spouse based on their filing status alone without any additional withholding.
Okay.
Hope that.
We have a question about whether or not the withholding requirement applies to retirement income.
The MW4, or I guess I'm not understanding.
Well, our withholding is not, it's not required that you have withholding on your retirement income, but you definitely can. You just file that MW4 with the payer of the retirement.
Oh, I got you. Okay, sorry. I was thinking of an exemption in my mind, so I was like, but no, yes,
Yeah. So should employers be advising on how to fill out this form? Will they be liable for any associated issues that arise?
Will the employer, if they help the employee complete the form?
Yeah,
go
and
ahead.
I think maybe they were just asking about how to, how should they go about this with their employees? Do we have any recommendations on how to broach this subject with the employees?
There's a couple of things you can do. I mean, you can approach it with them as the employer. If you're not comfortable, we're more than happy to come in and do some trainings with your employees and go over the Form MW4. We're happy to do that over Zoom or Teams. We are currently going to be traveling in January to one of the chambers and doing a presentation for them. So we're more than happy to help any way that you need that assistance. Just feel free to reach out to myself or Donna, and we can coordinate that with you. Because we do understand it's quite a change, and sometimes it's better coming from us than from the employer, and we understand that. We're more than happy to help however we can. So.
All right, a few more out here. You may have answered this already, but do current employees need to fill out the new MW4, or do we just need to move forward with new employees?
I would encourage all employees, new or old, just because of that change where now we are deferring to the federal filing status. If they choose not to, again, it's a business decision for you to decide whether you withhold them at a single rate or you withhold based on, married, filing jointly. But again, like in the instructions, if you don't get a form back from your employees, we just encourage the single filing status since that's the highest rate.
Okay. And not all retirement companies will withhold even when they are requested to. So will their estimated payments be okay during the year? Or is there going to be a penalty for the taxpayer since estimates are not considered as you put in the appropriate way to withhold during the year? So for retirement, definitely there are retirement companies that will not honor the retirees' wish to have them withhold. And in that case, then estimated tax payments are required. The retiree needs to pay estimated tax payments on those, on the distributions that they'll receive. All right. And then last, we had a question about, are you required to withhold Montana taxes on wages paid to an S-Corp owner if they are electing to pay Montana tax through the PTET? Donna, did you want to take that one?
I think that would be best answered by you, Rachel.
Yep. They can complete, of course, wages are required to be withheld upon in Montana. However, they can use that reduced withholding line to determine what they're they can use that reduced withholding line to put in the amount that they want withheld for the year, or for the pay period, based on what they believe their year-end liability will be. And then finally, will you be doing some public outreach encouraging anyone earning W-4 covered wages to check their withholding for 2024 due to the change? Yes,
We have,
absolutely. Go for it, Jen.
Sorry about that. We've done several things. One, obviously, is the tax news you can use, which you guys have registered for this this webinar per that tax news you can use. We put it out on Facebook and Instagram, I believe. I know it was out there. I have sent a email to the local chambers that I could get the information for. There was a few in some smaller towns that didn't have information for me to send it to them, but I did reach out. There's like 85 chambers, and I think I reached about 95% of those. They are going to put it out in their newsletters to their chamber members. Again, we've offered to do presentations if anybody has any questions or wants us to come in and do that. I have sent an email with this information out to the Montana CPAs to put it in their newsletter. I don't believe we're doing any kind of like news spot or radio spot or anything like that, but we are reaching out in other ways as best we can to get the word out to everybody. We're really hoping the word of mouth helps as well, and that people will hear about it that way as well. Did I miss anything? I don't think I missed anything.
We've got 1 minute left, and we have a few questions standing out here. The meeting will be recorded and will be available afterwards. It takes about a day for us to process it, for it to get up on our site. So if you missed any of it and want to check it out, it'll be available tomorrow. And then one last, hopefully this will be quick. Would you please confirm that if a worker checks both boxes 1B and also 2, then we should withhold based on the single table?
So Donna, correct me if I'm wrong in that situation, because 1B and 2 both pertain to married. So if they mark both of those boxes, if they mark 2, then you shouldn't anticipate there being any kind of additional withholding on line 3. If they mark 1B, then there could potentially be additional withholding due to the multiple jobs worksheet. So if they do mark both of those, but they leave line 3 blank, I would probably personally, I can't tell you what to do. That's a business decision, obviously, but I would defer to 2. But if they do give you marked both boxes and then they put a dollar amount in line 3, then I would defer to 1B because they both pertain to married filing jointly. Donna, does that?
Yes, that sounds correct.
Okay.
All right.
And again,
10 o'clock.
Okay. Nope. I was just going to say, if there's any questions we didn't get to, we will be responding to those within 24 hours. And so if your question didn't get answered today, we will be reviewing all the questions and answers and just sending in like a recap of everything. So hopefully that will address anybody's questions.
Holy moly. Great job, Jen.
Thank
we want
you.
to thank everybody for taking their time out of their day to do some webinars with us. Obviously, we will have all the questions and we can get those answered appropriately. Just to answer everybody's question, this will be recorded. This will be posted on our website for later consumption. Maybe you had to duck away, but it will be available probably within 24 hours, like Rachel had said. The Zoom client gives me the files after about 8 hours. So it takes us about 24-hour turnaround to get the information up, and that will be available on our website, as well as other webinars that maybe you might have missed in the past. So check those out. Jennifer, thanks for hanging out with us. Rachel, thanks for helping out. Donna, Aaron, everybody behind the scenes, thank you so much. We'll let you go for the rest of the day. Have an awesome day. Have an awesome week. And thanks for sharing everything with us. Sharing
Thank
your
you, Jason.
Hey, you got it. I will end the recording and end the webinar. Thank you guys so much. Thank you.